In this video, we will discuss the 1950s. It was a time of conformity, prosperity, and economic growth, at a time when the Soviet Union loomed large as our bitter rival and enemy. It was also a time when the civil rights movement was born, and the emergence of its charismatic leader, Martin Luther King Jr. In 1952, the last year of Truman's presidency, Americans were looking for relief from the Korean War and an end to the political scandals commonly referred to as the mess in Washington. During Truman's administration, the Second Red Scare was dominating politics, as many people were terrified of the spread of communism in the U.S. Republicans nominated World War II war hero Dwight D. Eisenhower to be their presidential candidate. The moderate Ike, as he was known as, chose the conservative young senator from California, Richard Nixon, as his vice presidential candidate. During the Second Red Scare, he made a name for himself by attacking communists in the Alger Hiss case. The Democrats nominated the popular governor from Illinois, Adlai Stevenson. As a non-politician, Ike had a spotless reputation that was nearly spoiled when reports showed that Nixon had used campaign funds for his own personal use. Nixon was about to be dropped from the ticket when he used the new technology television to his advantage. He went on TV with his wife and daughters around him and admitted to accepting a dog named Checkers, whom his family loved. He refused to return the dog to the donor. This so-called Checkers speech won Nixon the support of millions of viewers by tugging at their heartstrings. While this helped the ticket, Ike pulled ahead of the Democrats by pledging during the last days of the campaign to go to Korea and end the war. Ike won 55% of the popular vote in an electoral college landslide, winning 442 to 89. After 20 years out of the presidential office, Republicans had to reinvent their brand. Eisenhower proposed a new dynamic conservatism. Be liberal with all things that deal with the people, but be conservative when dealing with the economy or government. This was known as modern Republicanism. A moderate on social issues, Ike accepted most of the New Deal programs as a reality of modern life, and even extended some of them. Social Security was extended to 10 million more citizens, and the minimum wage was increased. He opposed a federal health care insurance program and federal aid to education. Ike was a fiscal conservative, whose first priority was balancing the budget after years of deficit spending. Although his annual budgets were not always balanced, he came closer to curbing federal spending than any of his successors. The most permanent legacy of the Eisenhower years was the passage of the Highway Act of 1956, which authorized the construction of 42,000 miles of interstate highways, linking all the nation's major cities. It had a major impact on the economy. It created jobs, promoted the truck industry, accelerated the growth of suburbs, and helped to limit sectionalism by creating a more homogeneous national culture. This was a serious blow to the railroad industry, which had been in decline since the 1920s. The interstate highway system also had a significant impact on the environment, as thousands of trees were cut down to make way for new highways to connect the major cities. Eisenhower's true reason for building the highway system was related to the Cold War. Roads could be used for emergency landings for the Air Force in times of war. The roads will be used to transport troops, supplies, and weapons. Overhead passes had to be a certain height on all interstate highways, so missiles could be transported underneath them. Since our country's inception, our motto has been E pluribus unum, out of many one. In 1956, it was changed to In God We Trust. On July 30th, 1956, 2 years after pushing to have the phrase under God inserted into the Pledge of Allegiance, President Dwight D. Eisenhower signs a law officially declaring In God We Trust to be the nation's official motto. The law also mandated that the phrase be printed on all American paper currency. The phrase had been placed on U.S. coins since the Civil War, when, according to the Historical Association of the United States Treasury, religious sentiment reached a peak. The reason behind this is related to the Cold War. It served as a message that the U.S. was a Christian nation, unlike the Soviet Union, which promoted state atheism, or no religion. Polio is an infectious disease caused by a virus. It typically causes muscle weakness and can lead to paralysis. President Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio at age 39 and lost the use of his legs. The first effective polio vaccine was developed by Jonas Salk at the University of Pittsburgh in 1952. It was tested and finally licensed for use in 1955. Vaccination against polio began, and by 1961, very few cases of polio were reported. In the 1950s, white teenagers were buying African American rhythm and blues records. Radio stations began to play this music on the air, and it became very popular. African American artists began performing an evolved form of this music known as rock and roll. Soon, white artists also began making music influenced by African American artists. Rock and roll music had loud and heavy beats, coupled with lyrics that appealed to young people. Its popularity soared with artists like Buddy Holly, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and Bill Haley and the Comets. The most popular superstar of this genre of music was Elvis Presley, whose dance moves were seen by adults as inappropriate. As the consumerism of the 1950s spread throughout the country, some Americans rejected these ideas. Building on the lost generation of the 1920s, the Beat Generation started a literary movement that influenced American culture and politics of the post-war era. The Beats, as they were called, rejected materialism and consumerism. They rejected mainstream American values and experimented with drugs and alternative lifestyles. The Beat Generation would lead into the counterculture movement of the 1960s. In 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the US and the world by launching the first satellite into orbit around the Earth, known as Sputnik. Suddenly, the technological leadership of the US was open to question. To add insult to injury, US rockets trying to match the Soviets failed repeatedly. What was responsible for this scientific debacle? Some blamed schools and inadequate instruction in the sciences. Kids were too busy watching television and listening to rock and roll. In 1958, Congress passed the National Defense and Education Act to give hundreds of millions of dollars in federal money to schools for science and foreign language education. In 1958, Congress created NASA, or the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. NASA's purpose was to get the US to catch up to the Soviets in space, and even pass them up. Americans were terrified of the Soviets having Sputnik for several reasons. The Soviets could spy on us from space, or they could put a thermonuclear warhead on the missiles and rockets that launched the satellites and deliver them anywhere in the world in minutes. There was no defense against them. The US will spend billions on NASA to build missiles and explore outer space. The Soviets will do the same to try and stay one step ahead of the US. This is known as the space race. You may not realize it, but the US space program has brought technological innovations that have improved our daily lives. Several household items that you use were developed by NASA for use in the space program. Water purification. NASA had to find a way for astronauts to drink clean water while in space. NASA's system turns sweat, urine, and respiration into clean drinking water. That technology has been brought to Earth and purifies your drinking water in your home. Fire-resistant material in Kevlar. NASA developed a lightweight breathing system and heat-resistant materials designed to protect capsules upon re-entry. That technology has been utilized by the military and firefighters. Solar power. NASA developed this technology to create an unmanned aircraft powered by solar power. The craft was never created, but we use the technology today to power everything from traffic signs to homes. Portable cordless vacuums. Black & Decker helped NASA extract samples of lunar material by developing a computer program that optimized the drill's power consumption. That program led to the development of the Dust Buster. There are numerous other technological innovations that were developed thanks to the space exploration, including memory foam and enriched baby food.